Middle East, and I wanted to take some time to walk through what is happening on the ground from the perspective of someone who works in the oil and gas industry and has spent many years working in this region. The situation is evolving quickly, and the conflict that began on the end of February is now expanded into something that has having very real consequences not only for the region but for the global energy markets, shipping routes, and the broader world economy. In this live, I plan to break down some key topics based on analysis contained in, the research I've done over the last 24 hours. I'm going to talk about the current status in the Straits of Hormuz, some critical energy choke points, what the IEA has to say. We'll get into supply chain, Russia, China, Iran, what's been happening over the last 24 hours. So stick around if you're interested in this sort of topic, and hopefully we can bring everybody up to speed as to what is happening. If you do like this type of content, make sure you like and subscribe. It does help out. Most people that tune in, we find that most people that tune in to social media these days, maybe half actually subscribe, but I am doing regular updates. So appreciate that like. It's the first one, you're first. So first, let's start off with the International Energy Agency, which talks about minimum requirements for countries to have in terms of strategic oil and gas reserves. The IEA recommends 90 days, and we have some major economies that are not compliant. So it's important to talk about it because these countries are going to be drastically affected as the price of crude and liquid natural gas goes up. As of March 7th, yesterday, the Brent crude prices surged past $90 a barrel, and the Straits of Hormuz is effectively still closed. So the global energy security architecture is facing its most severe stress since the 1970s, when we had the oil embargoes. The International Energy Agency requires member countries to hold at least 90 days of net oil imports in reserve to buffer against such disruptions. So the following is basically a look at the top 20 economies based on 2026 GDP projections, and the compliance varies pretty significantly between the different IEA members, association partners, and net exporters who are exempt from the 90-day rule. I also have a cost note. This is based on $90 a barrel. We did see a little north of that, I think 93. So this is essentially the ranking of the country in terms of its economy, its GDP, as well as whether or not it is compliant, the amount of oil in terms of percent that it imports from through the Straits of Hormuz, and not exclusively oil and gas, as well as the estimated cost to bring that up to the 30 or the 90-day requirement. So if they have the reserves in, I'll mention that, but also if they are deficient, what it would take in order to get them to become at the required amount. So United States, they are compliant. They import about 2.5% through the Straits of Hormuz. Estimated cost of the 90-day supply is $52.5 billion. China is not a member, so they're not compliant. They have approximately 70 days. They are 45 to 50% through the Straits of Hormuz, with a $91.6 billion required estimated cost at the current prices. Germany is a member compliant 90 days. They import 8% through the Straits of Hormuz. India is not a member of the IEA. They only have about 45 days of current inventory. So a major setback for India, and 55 to 85% comes through the Straits of Hormuz. So India is definitely going to be impacted by this. Japan, another major economy in the world, they have 150 plus days of oil and gas inventory, which and 95% of Japan's oil and gas comes through the Straits of Hormuz. So they're in pretty dire straits in terms of if the Straits of Hormuz don't open up, but they have 150 days, almost half a year's worth of inventory. So they're in pretty strategically kind of in a good spot, but also looking like as this stretches on could get tight. The UK, they are a member of the IEA. They're compliant. They have 90 days. 8% of their imported oil and gas comes from the Straits of Hormuz. France, also compliant, 8% again through the Straits of Hormuz. Italy, compliant, 8% through the Straits of Hormuz. Russia is a net exporter. They are exempt. So basically nothing comes through the Straits of Hormuz for them. Canada is a member but exempt because it's a net exporter. Brazil, non-compliant, 10 days production, only 6% comes through the Straits of Hormuz. Spain, a member compliant, 90 days, and Mexico, member exempt because they are a net exporter. We also have Australia with 90 days. I've heard various reports on Australia. I've heard that they have 30 days, but this report from the IEA is saying that they have 90 days. They get 15.6% of their imports through the Straits of Hormuz. South Korea, member compliant. They have 200 days worth of inventory. 60% of their oil and gas goes to the Straits of Hormuz. Turkey is a member, non-compliant, only 31 days in inventory. 11% goes to the Straits of Hormuz. Indonesia, not a member, but still not compliant. 12 to 20 days. They get 13.9% through the Straits of Hormuz, as do other Asia's average. Netherlands, member compliant, 90 days, 8% through the Straits. Saudi Arabia, net exporter, so they're exempt. And Poland, being the 20th largest economy, member compliant, 90 days, 15% goes through the Straits of Hormuz. So you can see that there's a lot of countries that are still compliant, but get a significant portion of their imports through the Straits of Hormuz, which is currently shut down. I guess the current effective closure of the Straits of Hormuz has created two distinct tiers of vulnerability. The critical exposure here is Asia. Japan and South Korea have the highest physical dependency on the imports, but their massive strategic reserves provide a temporary buffer. In contrast, India is extremely vulnerable with only 10 to 12 days of government strategic reserves and approximately 45 days of total commercial stock. They also, the amount, because the price of oil has gone up, the amount of money it's going to require to continue to import is higher. So definitely not going to help out their economies. From a refined product perspective, we have a crisis in Europe. While the EU relies on the Middle East for only 8% of its crude, it is 40% dependent on the Gulf for diesel and jet fuel. This is creating localized fuel shortages for aviation and logistics, despite meeting the crude oil reserve requirements. Global production ramp up. We have some alternative suppliers to meet the 20 to 21 million barrel per day currently blocked or at risk in the Middle East. Other exporters have to increase their production, but most experts agree that no combination or alternative routes and producers can fully replace the Gulf's capacity on a short-term timeline. So unless this conflict resolves itself, expect to have shortages is basically what the consensus is. The total global spare capacity is estimated to be 3.5 to 4.5 million barrels per day. Roughly 80% of this is concentrated in Saudi Arabia and the UAE. We also have this logistical bottleneck at the Straits of Hormuz and the east-west pipeline to the Red Sea. If terminal infrastructure at Jeddah can handle the volume, they can move it up to 7 million barrels a day, but nowhere near what goes through the Straits of Hormuz. From a non-Middle East ramp-up requirement, to fill the gap, we have the Americas, so US, Canada, Brazil, Guyana, Argentina. They have to expand. In the United States, it's expected to grow production by 500,000 barrels per day in 2026, primarily from the Permian Basin. Ramping up further would require an immediate surge in rig counts and hydraulic fracturing activity, with a 30 to 45-day timeline for meaningful volume increases. Of course, 500,000 doesn't replace the millions of barrels lost not going through the Straits of Hormuz. Brazil, could potentially add 0.2 to 0.4 million barrels per day as new floating production, storage, and offloading FPSO vessels come online. Full capacity restoration of shut-in wells could require 60 to 90 days, so we're 2 to 3 months to ramp that up if it's possible at all. Guyana rapidly expanding through the Starbrook block with the Yellowtail and Yara projects expected to add 140 to 250,000 barrels per day by the end of 2026. Really appreciate those likes. And this update is going to be pretty comprehensive, covering not just oil and gas, but also the broader implications of this. Russia currently operating near maximum output levels due to the Ukraine-related needs. Their capacity is estimated to have been declining since the late 2025. But despite this, Russia is aggressively redirecting discounted barrels to India and China to try and capture market share from the blocked Gulf flows. From a logistics challenge perspective, even if production is increased, global shipping costs have already doubled for very large crude carriers. This is the VLCCs. And insurance premiums for the region are at a 6-year high, making the delivery of alternative supplies significantly more expensive. So from a strategic and economic perspective for Russia, what does this mean? With higher prices of oil and gas, and Russia being a net exporter and embroiled in this conflict in Ukraine, how does this affect their ability to sustain that war? So I guess from a strategic and economic perspective, the 2026 Middle East conflict serves as a boon and a potential financial windfall for the Russian Federation. The disruption to the Middle East energy supplies has sent global oil prices soaring, allowing Russia to capitalize on the resulting market panic. While Moscow's 2026 budget was balanced on a projected oil price of approximately $59 per barrel, the conflict has driven Russian export prices to over $70 to $72 per barrel. So they're definitely seeing increase in revenue, with a market share capture on the horizon because Russian seaborne oil flows do not rely on the Straits of Hormuz. Moscow is uniquely positioned to fill the gap for major Asian economies like China and India, which are currently struggling to secure Gulf supplies. So this is a price spike that follows a record budget shortfall in January 26. The current oil shock provides a lifeline to Russia and reduces the domestic economic pain caused by the sanctions of the West. What does this mean for the war in Ukraine? So there's several things. We've got a Western resource diversion. The US and its NATO allies are being forced to divert diplomatic bandwidth and critical military hardware, specifically Patriot air defense systems and artillery stocks, away from Ukraine to protect regional bases and Israeli population centers. We have media and diplomatic oxygen, if you will, with the global view fixed on the Middle East. Russia faces less international scrutiny, granting it some breathing room to intensify attacks on Ukrainian infrastructure and power grids while accelerating territorial advances in the Donbass. We have seen some increased attacks over the last 24 hours. So this finances the war machine. The surge in oil and gas revenues, which provide up to 30% of the Russian Federation budget, strengthens the Kremlin's war chest. Higher revenues make it easier for President Putin to sustain long-term military financing and resist pressure for a premature settlement in Ukraine. The long-term strategic risk, despite these immediate gains, analysts highlight significant risks for Russia if the conflict evolves. They've lost a strategic partner. A total collapse of the Iranian regime would deprive Moscow of a primary anti-Western ally and a critical supplier of drone technology and ammunition. From a post-war oil glut perspective, if the conflict ends in regime change and the eventual lifting of sanctions on Iranian oil, global markets could be flooded with cheap crude, which would erode Russia's competitive position in Asia and squeeze its long-term revenues. So I wanted to do kind of a deep dive on some projects that have been announced since February 2028 2026, February 28th, 2026, as starting up or ramping up around the world because of this conflict, right? So obviously there's going to be exporters that are going to capitalize on this or try to meet the demand themselves from a strategic perspective. This is now entering the second week, and the global energy industry and financial institutions are shifting from emergency response to long-term contingency planning. This is going to be specific oil and gas projects that are and the projected economic fallout across three potential time horizons. So oil and gas projects announcements post February 28th. Since the start of Operation Epic Fury, non-Middle Eastern producers and the Americas, such as US, Canada, Brazil, Guyana, and Argentina, have initiated several fast-track measures to mitigate the loss of approximately 20 million barrels a day through the Straits of Hormuz. The United States, they've got a little bit of a rig count rebound for the first time in 2026. The US rig count ticked higher to 551 active rigs on March 6th. This includes 3 additional rigs in the Eagle Ford and 1 in the Permian Basin. This is a direct response to the WTI futures surpassing $90. Emergency infrastructure. The Trump administration is considering invoking the 1950 Defense Production Act to override legal impediments and restart an idle pipeline offshore California to move newly produced crude to refineries immediately. And we also have the DC activation. US operators are prioritizing the completion of drilled but uncompleted wells, which analysts estimate could add 150 barrels a day to the market within 30 days. If we look at Guyana and Brazil, Guyana, ExxonMobil has accelerated engineering for the Uaru project, targeting its first oil in 2026 at 250,000 barrels a day. This project is expected to push Guyana's national capacity past 1 million barrels a day. Brazil, pre-salt ramping. Petrobras has accelerated the ramp up of their FPSO, which reached record average production at 240,000 barrels a day. So you can see some increase coming out of Brazil. OPEC Plus, we've got production hike March 1st. 8 OPEC nations, including Saudi, Russia, and UAE, agreed to a modest increase of 206,000 barrels a day for April. ExxonMobil has announced the first dedicated shipment of 600,000 barrels of fuel from the US Gulf Coast directly to Australia to fill gaps left by the disrupted Asian refining hubs. And Saudi has significantly increased crude loadings at the Red Sea port of Yanbu, utilizing the East-West pipeline, 5 to 7 million barrels a day capacity to bypass the blocked Strait of Hormuz. So pretty significant economic consequences of the war. It's highly sensitive to the duration, with the US economy is somewhat buffered by domestic production. Europe and Asia face stagflationary risk, if you will. All right, so we've got a 30-day scenario logistical disruption. Analysts view as a price discovery phase in the first 30 days. Market volatility is pretty high, with physical supply gaps largely covered by the 1.2 billion barrels held in the IEA public emergency stocks. The primary financial hit comes from a 100 to 200% surge in maritime insurance premiums and freight rates as vessels reroute around the Cape of Good Hope. The 90-day scenario is recessionary. At 3 months, current commercial and strategic stockpiles in countries like India and China reach critical depletion levels. High energy costs begin eroding industrial competitiveness, particularly in energy-intensive sectors like steel, chemicals, and cement. Central banks face a dual mandate dilemma, unable to cut interest rates due to energy-driven inflation despite slowing growth. And greater than 90-day, the scenario is basically a tail risk collapse. A prolonged blockade of the Straits of Hormuz is considered a black swan event because natural gas, LNG, has almost no alternative export routes. European gas prices would likely remain at 100% premiums, potentially causing a near total shutdown of the EU's chemical industry. In the US, the national average for gasoline could settle above $3.70 a gallon, acting as a massive tax on consumer spending and potentially triggering a deep contraction in the automotive and aviation sectors. Another angle I wanted to look at, so now that we've covered the oil and gas portion of this, is some of the rhetoric that's coming out of the Trump administration. They've made some pretty wild claims over the last week, some of it disputed by um, the Iranians and others, but I thought I'd go through some of them. Since the initiation of Operation Epic Fury, February 28th, 2026, Trump administration has utilized a series of aggressive and unconventional statements that analysts suggest have systematically altered the geopolitical landscape. The remarks have frequently contradicted the regime's submission goals stated by senior officials instead of fueling Iranian resolve and creating significant friction with long-standing NATO and Gulf allies. So there's been statements on the Iranian succession and regime control. The most provocative has been focused on direct management of the Iranian state following the death of the Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. On March 5th, President Trump stated during an interview with Axios that he has to be involved in the appointment of Iran's next supreme leader, comparing the strategy to the recent installation of acting president in Venezuela. This is pretty crazy, right? You got a US president saying they're going to dictate who is going to be in control in Iran. Dismissal of successors. So Trump has explicitly ruled out Mujtaba Khamenei, a leading contender to replace his father, labeling him a lightweight and unacceptable to the United States. And then a State Department official characterized the strategy as decapitate and delegate, aiming to manage regime behavior from afar without a sustained ground presence. So it's a model that the experts are calling regime capture. We've also seen other rhetoric about unconditional surrender and threats of destruction. As the war enters its second week, the administration's baseline for ending the conflict shifted towards total capitulation. The MIGA doctrine, make Iran great again, I guess. On March 6th, Trump posted on Truth Social that there would be no deal with Iran except unconditional surrender, subsequently introducing the slogan, Make Iran Great Again, MIGA. If you're enjoying this type of content, please like and subscribe. I agree, war must stop. I've got a lot to cover in this presentation today. I will do my best to cover everything from not just within the Middle East and Iran, but also the global perspective. Right now, we're just on what Trump has to say. For those of you that are new here, don't know me, my name is Jonathan Paulette. I'm an oil and gas professional. I'm currently in the Middle East, giving you updates from the ground on a near daily basis, going live, sometimes every second day. So if you want updates, check out my TikTok. I'm also on YouTube, where I will post the full-length video of this live stream. So threats of annihilation. Responding to Iranian president's rejection of surrender, Trump warned that Iran is under serious consideration for complete destruction and certain death, and would be hit with a force that has never been seen before. They've also got a widening of target lists. Trump announced on March 7th that the coalition is now considering areas and groups as targets that were previously off limits. There's also been some rhetoric towards international allies and NATO allies. The administration has utilized public rebukes and economic threats against allies who have shown hesitation in facilitating military operations. Oh, interesting. I have received a violation. I wonder why that is. I wouldn't know why, but apparently I'm restricted because I'm violating something interesting. That is a really fascinating outcome. Am I being censored? Kind of crazy. All right, so there's been some trade threats against Spain. Or has somebody reported me on here? Is that why you get a violation? I'm not sure when it's going to end. Nobody knows. Could be a day, could be a month, could be 6 months, could be a year. Yeah, I didn't think I said anything that was controversial. I'm just reading official statements. I'm not giving any kind of opinion on what they are. I'm just expressing what has already been said, but somehow that got violations. So I don't know how you overcome that. Maybe too many violations and I'll get my lives suspended. That was what the pop up on my phone just said. So pretty crazy. Getting censored. Anyways, I'll do my best to continue. If I get cut off, I guess I'm getting censored off the internet. Trade threats against Spain. So after Spain refused to allow U.S. forces to use joint military bases for strikes in Iran, Trump called the country terrible and instructed the Treasury Department to cut off all dealings with the nation. He further remarked, we could use their bases if we wanted, and we could just fly in and use it. Nobody's going to tell us not to use it. On March 7th, Trump took a shot at the UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer regarding the potential deployment of British aircraft carriers. He stated the US is no longer needing them, adding, we don't need people that join wars after we've already won. Appreciate all those likes. I'm not sure if that'll help overcome the violation. It did say that I appreciate that. Just carry on. We're watching. All right, I'll keep going then. Latin American diplomacy. During a summit to launch a cartel coalition on March 7th, Trump struck a dismissive tone, joking that he had no time to learn their languages and accusing regional leaders of letting gangs seize their territory. We have had some comments on human cost and operational accountability. Following the death of 6 U.S. soldiers in Kuwait, Trump commented, that's the way it is, likely be more deaths. That's inferred before it ends, a remark critics described as callous. On March 7th, Trump blamed Iran for a deadly strike on a girls' school in Manab, which killed over 160 children. There are some reports suggesting it was U.S. forces that were responsible. There's some reports saying it was Iran itself. He justified this by saying, they're very inaccurate with their munitions. They have no accuracy whatsoever. I don't know what the truth is there. It's hard to say, right? There's a lot of propaganda on both sides over that, who hit the school. Gas prices. When asked about the economic impact of the war, Trump shrugged off the soaring fuel costs, stating, if they rise, they rise. From an Iranian response, Iranian officials have used these statements to unify domestic factions. The president of Iran called the surrender demand a dream they should take to their grave, while an Iranian cleric publicly called for Trump's blood. We have European leaders growing increasingly vocal in their opposition. Spanish Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez described the U.S. approach as playing Russian roulette with the destiny of millions, while French and Italian officials have characterized the strikes as being outside the framework of international law. And then we have Gulf, the Arabian Gulf, Persian Gulf, depending on which side you're on. Despite effective air defense coordination, Gulf officials have expressed anger and frustration that the U.S. has ignored their warnings of regional catastrophe and allowed their interceptor stocks to become rapidly depleted while focusing primarily on defending Israel. Is this going to get worse? I would think it's going to get worse before it gets better, but you never know. Trump is unpredictable, right? He could just tomorrow say, hey, we've won, and pulled everybody out. But I did hear that they're moving in a third carrier group into the region. So we'll see how that plays out. Will it get worse in Lebanon? I would think so. Yes, but I couldn't tell you for sure. I mean, who knows, right? You're from Ireland, Dublin. You're doing well. Appreciate it. Thank you very much. And I appreciate everybody that's joined in this morning. It's early. It's Sunday. It's 9 a.m. Arabian Standard Time here. So I'm not sure where everybody is joining in from. I do have some updates. Yes, right now we're talking about adjacent conflicts. I'm going to move away from the rhetoric that's coming out of Washington and move more towards how this is going to affect other conflicts around the world that were being supported by the United States, Russia, China, but now all the resources are being diverted to this conflict, which is going to leave many cut off from some support. So the war between the United States, Israel coalition, and the Islamic Republic of Iran has entered second week. It's gone from a precision decapitation strike into a regional war of industrial attrition. As of this morning, 5:24 Arabian Standard Time, March 8th, 2026, the conflict has widened to include direct kinetic or logistical involvement from 16 different countries, while global energy transit through the Straits of Hormuz remain at a near total standstill. So just to summarize everything that's happened, February 28th, the Operation Epic Fury kicked off and Operation Roaring Lion. So it's two. Operation Epic Fury is the United States. Operation Roaring Lion is Israel. With 900 strikes in 12 hours, the supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, and over 40 senior officials were killed in Iran, and Iran declares the Straits of Hormuz closed. March 1st to 2nd, the coalition established air superiority over Tehran. Hezbollah joins the war, launching rockets into northern Israel and Haifa, triggering an Israeli ground incursion into southern Lebanon. March 3rd and 4th, the U.S. Navy begins a mission to sink the entire Iranian Navy. Over 30 Iranian vessels destroyed, including the drone carrier Shahid Bagheri. The Iranian frigate Iris Dena is torpedoed near Sri Lanka. March 5th and 6th, the conflict expands into the Caucasus and Turkey. U.S. B-2 Spirit bombers strike Iran's defense industrial zones and to erase long-term manufacturing capacity. And March 7th and early into March 8th today, Israel launches a broad-scale wave of over 80 fighter jets against Western Tehran. Iran launches 23rd wave of strikes, reportedly using new generation missiles against Tel Aviv and the Ben Gurion airport. So, more of a deep dive into each of these different participants in this conflict, if you will. We've got Israel and the United States. So they've transitioned from industrial neutralization to phase two, using B-2 Spirit bombers to utilize 2,000-pound penetrator munitions against deeply buried ballistic missile launchers and ammunition depots. Overnight between March 7th and 8th, more than 80 Israeli fighter jets targeted the IRGC Imam Hussein Military University and remaining launch sites aimed at Israel. In Lebanon, there was a question about Lebanon. If you are in Lebanon, maybe you have a different perspective. Of course, I'm getting my information as best I can from what I hope are reliable sources, but there could be errors. So if I say anything that is inaccurate and you have firsthand knowledge of it, feel free to point it out in the comments. I'm happy to be wrong because it just means I learned something, and so would everybody else in this live. Happy to be wrong. Just let me know and I will correct myself as long as I catch that comment, okay? So I heard there was a Nabi Sheet raid, a high-risk airborne operation March 7th. Israeli helicopters inserted commandos into the town of Nabi Sheet in the eastern Bekaa Valley. I don't know if you say Bekaa, Lebanese can correct me. The IDF stated the raid was intended to find the remains of missing navigator Ron Arad. This is, I believe, from 1986, navigator from 1986. Intense firefights with Hezbollah fighters ensued, resulting in 41 deaths in the area following Israeli cover strikes. Iran and proxies. I will get to Israel. I'm not there yet. Honestly, the news coming out of Israel, same with Iran, is very guarded. It's hard to know exactly. You see some reports, only 12 have been killed. And then you see reports where like many more were killed in image and just one injured in just one strike. So it's really hard to know for sure. Both sides are, this is like propaganda, fake news warfare. So I'm doing my best. I will, I'm trying to be accurate, but I've got to go through it. So Iran and proxies, despite an 85% drop in missile launch volume, Iran's kill chain remains active. March 7th, the IRGC struck the Louis P., a Marshall Islands flag tanker in the Persian Gulf, Arabian Gulf for those of you that prefer Arabian Gulf. Iran also carried out massive strikes in Al Dhafra Air Base in the UAE, reportedly hitting a U.S. satellite communication center and early warning radars. Yes, Amina, the media is spreading so many lies. I totally agree. It's really hard to know what's true. We won't know for 50 years, right? When the CIA finally releases unredacted files. In the meantime, this is what we have. It's the best we can do. I think social media might be some of the best resources because you're going to get firsthand information from people that are witnesses to what's happening. Otherwise, it's all reported and filtered through government propagandized news outlets. So, from a regional and peripheral perspective, Jordan officially accused Iran of directly targeting its vital installations, reporting 119 incoming missiles and drones over the past week, with 108 intercepted. Azerbaijan, following drone strikes on its Nakhchivan airport, March 5th, Baku has withdrawn its diplomats from Tehran and closed its southern airspace. Turkey, NATO air defenses intercepted an Iranian ballistic missile over northern Syria, heading for Turkish territory, and debris fell in the Hatay province. So, a lot going on. Any more attacks against their friends after the apology from Iran? Yeah, I did see the president of Iran make his apology, and then so that was yesterday that I saw that. And yesterday we had more alerts on our phones. I heard more intercepted missiles flying overhead. The explosions from that. I posted a video on that. Actually, I went outside to get some sunlight and record a video, and then got the alert on my phone to seek shelter and get inside. So, yes, even after the apology from the Iranian president, they're still making attacks. However, they're also being attacked. So you can't really fault them for that, right? If I'm being attacked, I'm going to retaliate. And if the only means I have to do that is to attack the countries around me that have my enemy's bases in them, then you can expect that kind of retaliation. So first full week of fighting has caused the worst weekly performance for global markets since 2022's energy crisis. U.S. markets down 2.2%, also hurt by weak jobs data and inflation fears. The European markets down 5.5%, worst week since 2022 due to heavy dependence on Gulf fuel. In the Asian markets, we had record declines, worst performance since the pandemic. In commodities, oil spiked. Brent crude rose 24% this week to $94 a barrel. WTI rose 30% to $91.50 a barrel. So from a financial impact, the projections are 30 days, manageable shock, inflation rises 0.5%. Most advanced economies absorbed costs through their reserves. 90 days or less, we're looking at a turning point towards a global recession. Depletion of commercial stocks in India and China, I mean the national reserves of oil and gas. If it's more than 90 days, it's more of a systemic crisis. Oils could surge. Pick a number. 150 a barrel? We don't know. European natural gas prices could quadruple. We do have non-compliance with some of the IEA members. I did talk about that earlier. But we do have the USA drilling permits on federal lands have surged 55%. Completion of drilled but uncompleted wells could add 150,000 barrels a day. Guyana fast-tracking the Uaru project, another 250,000 barrels a day. Brazil accelerating their FPSO, 480,000 barrels a day. And Norway also at full capacity, but officials warn it cannot replace lost Qatari LNG volumes. The human cost so far, fatality risk in the GCC remains statistically lower than in major global cities due to high interception rates. So the question is, how long can this be sustained, right? We've got a lot of missiles and drones coming into the GCC nations. They're being intercepted for the most part, very high interception rate. Most countries in the 90s as a percentage. 3 people killed in the UAE. They were foreign nationals. In Kuwait, 2. Bahrain, 2. Oman, 1. Total confirmed 8 deaths. When you compare that to some of the top cities around the world, just St. Louis alone, 4 to 5 deaths a week. Jackson, 2 to 3 deaths a week. Memphis, 5 to 6. Chicago is like 15 to 20 deaths a week. So you're still safer in the Middle East right now. From a statistical perspective. However, if we run out of intercept missiles, that could change. And they are rerouting resources from other parts of the world, like Venezuela, as well as South Korea, is my understanding. So they don't have everything here to be able to support this bombardment. Iran, allegedly, it's being reported, has lost roughly 80% of its air defense systems. The U.S. mission to sink the entire Navy is nearly complete. Over 30 ships have been hit, including the Shahid Bagheri, a drone carrier, which is currently on fire. We've also got some submarines which are inoperable, and 3 Russian Kilo-class submarines are trapped in the Bandar Abbas. They're not Russian subs, they were built by the Russians for the Iranians. But these Kilo-class they're trapped, so they're in their berth, blocked in, can't get out. From an internal conflict and maybe potentially CIA involvement, we have an uprising. The massive Kurdish rebellion has reignited in the western provinces. Families reportedly used airstrike chaos to storm prisons and free political detainees. Reports indicate the CIA is arming Iranian Kurdish militias to draw the IRGC away from major cities, potentially providing an opening for mass civilian protests. Central leadership strikes have forced a decentralization of command. Power has been devolved to the provincial governors to maintain state functions. So there is a geopolitical strategy here with Russia and China. This is a windfall for the Russians. By the way, if you're enjoying this, please subscribe to this channel. I'm going to be bringing you regular updates, and hit the like button. Hopefully this pushes it out. Share to people if you want to have them join in. I'm going to be doing lives every day, every second day, as things evolve, how this conflict is affecting the Middle East, but also the broader picture for other countries. All right, so the conflict provides an economic lifeline to Moscow's war in Ukraine. They've got a revenue surplus from this. The Urals crude is now trading at $70 a barrel, well above the $59 benchmark, which was assumed in the 2026 budget. The U.S. is being forced to divert Patriot interceptors and artillery away from Ukraine to defend regional bases and Israel. U.S. officials confirmed Russia has been providing Iran with real-time targeting information for U.S. assets in the region. We also have China has kind of changed their stance. They've been pretty cautious. They don't want to jeopardize their energy security. Half of China's oil and 30% of its LNG passes through the Straits of Hormuz. But they're talking about providing financial assistance and weapons spares to the Iranians, so they're kind of entering in a way. I did mention, do a video yesterday talking about the impact of this. There is fear mongering going on in the world on social media about this is going to be like a World War III escalation. The Chinese and the Russians are getting involved. Personally, I don't really see that. Not yet. I'm not saying it can never get to that stage, but the Chinese providing financial support and some weapons spares, and the Russians providing intelligence is a far cry from what NATO and the United States have done to support Ukraine in their fight over the last 5 years against Russia. So if that didn't trigger a World War III event, I can't see how the very minimal support that Russia and China are giving Iran would also escalate to a World War III event. So I don't think it's time to be so worried about that at this point. But we have some adjacent conflicts around the world that are being impacted by this. So the Sudan civil war, the UAE, a key sponsor of the Rapid Support Forces, the RSF, uses Sudanese gold laundered in Dubai as the lifeblood of the war. Shipping and banking freezes in the Gulf are beginning to disrupt these covert supply chains. Myanmar civil war, the military junta relies on Iranian ghost ships for jet fuel to conduct airstrikes. U.S. strikes on Iranian ports and the Hormuz blockade have cut the supply, forcing the junta to seek alternative Southeast Asia sources. In South America and Venezuela, following the U.S. capture of Nicolas Maduro in January, the U.S. has maintained a massive military buildup off the Venezuelan coast. However, resources are now being diverted to the Middle East, potentially allowing Maduro's successors to entrench their rule. Ecuador, U.S. Special Forces are currently conducting joint operations with the Ecuadorian military to neutralize drug cartels, a front that the Trump administration uses to project strength closer to home. At this point, I did want to talk about if China does not get involved in a hot war, what are the potential incentives to support Iran that could extend the war, given the fact that they're so reliant on oil and gas from the region. USS Abraham Lincoln going down now. I haven't seen that. If that's the case, I'll have to check that out after this live stream. That's pretty crazy. I know they made that claim during the week as well, but hard to verify, right? While the People's Republic of China has maintained a public posture, just one second, I did get a message here. Okay. While the People's Republic of China has maintained a public posture of diplomatic restraint, its strategic interests provide significant incentives to provide clandestine or shadow support to Iran. If it's sustainable, it could prolong the conflict by providing the Iranian regime with the financial and technological means to endure a war of attrition, even as its conventional military foundations are essentially dismantled. From a strategic and economic perspective, China's incentives to support Iran are rooted in a long-term plan to reshape the global order and undermine the American hegemony. So, depletion of the U.S. munitions. Every Patriot interceptor used to defend Gulf cities and every precision munition expended on Iranian targets is one fewer available for the defense of Taiwan. Beijing views this as a window of opportunity to monitor U.S. operational capabilities and hardware failures in real time, providing invaluable data for a potential future Taiwan contingency. So there is this aspect of that, no different than Russia getting stuck in Ukraine and the Western powers trying to prop up Ukraine as long as possible, to extend that war out as long as possible, to deplete the Russian economy and resources. This would be the same thing, right? Now the U.S. is in this fight. The Russian and the Chinese interest would be to try and prolong it and drain the United States of all its resources. So by providing Iran with dual-use technology, spare parts, and missile components, China ensures that the Iranian kill chain remains active. This forces the U.S. to maintain high operational tempo and expensive military presence, effectively playing a long, patient economic, and technological game, while the U.S. consumes its resources in episodic gunboat diplomacy. There's an extended war provides China with a laboratory to accelerate the displacement of the US dollar as the global reserve currency. This is something that we've seen been floating around before the current hostilities. China was already circumventing the dollar by purchasing Iranian oil and in renminbi. A prolonged conflict allows Beijing to further normalize. This is a hard one, it doesn't flow off my tongue. Renminbi denominated trade for commodities, particularly with other BRICS nations seeking to avoid the weaponized interdependence of the SWIFT system. China is pursuing a rails before reserves strategy where payment systems and infrastructure delivery are embedded with the RMB settlement. By providing financial assistance and reconstruction promises to a weakened Iran, China can ensure that Iranian energy flows and future infrastructure are locked into this RMB-based workflow, bypassing the U.S. financial system entirely. So they see this as an opportunity to limit or reduce the power the U.S. dollar has in global economics. If you do like this update, make sure you like and subscribe. I'm trying to give more than just an update on the bombs that are falling and the attacks that are being made. Try to give a broader perspective of the cause and effect that's going to happen, all the outcomes that are potential from this, and the incentives of the different parties that are involved, and not just, the Israeli fighter jets hit this infrastructure in Iran, and Iran retaliated and shot this infrastructure in the GCC nations. I think it gives a more educated point of view. And I'm trying to be unbiased. Of course, I don't read Mandarin, I don't read Russian, I don't read Persian, I don't read Arabic. So a lot of my news, of course, is going to be one-sided. If you have a different perspective, please feel free to share that, and um, I will take that on board, especially if there's a resource that you could share with me of where to go. Appreciate that. Yes, it is really hard to get news from mainstream news. I find Al Jazeera is pretty good. Reuters is okay. There's a few others, but they all, I'm sure there's all an agenda somewhere, right, within them. So it's hard to get an unbiased perspective. But moving on, China views the Iranian regime as its most reliable anti-Western bulwark and a critical partner in the emerging multipolar commercial architecture of Eurasia. Beijing's move to grant Iran membership in BRICS Plus, was intended to lessen Tehran's international isolation and create an alternative power center to Washington's alliance system by rhetorically defending Iran's sovereignty against unilateral force. China positions itself as the primary champion of the global south and a stabilizing force for a multipolar world. A weakened but surviving Iranian regime becomes fundamentally dependent on Beijing for survival, investment, and eventual reconstruction. This allows China to dictate the terms of future energy corridors, such as the Belt and Road Initiative and the International North-South Transport Corridor, ensuring that the Middle East remains anchored to its eastward orientation. So trying to separate Iran, pull it into the fold of the BRICS as a future for that alliance. Despite the cutoff of imports through the Strait of Hormuz, China's manufacturing engine is protected by a sophisticated energy buffer. China holds the world's largest onshore crude stockpiles, approximately 1.39 billion barrels, enough to cover roughly 4 months, a total of total import loss. There's alternative pipelines. Beijing is actively turning towards Russia to plug the energy gap, utilizing existing and proposed land-based pipelines like Power of Siberia 2 that are immune to naval blockades in the Gulf. I think if the Chinese have shown anything, they can do massive projects on a very short timeline. So it'd be interesting to see how quickly they can put a pipeline together if they really needed to. The conflict serves as a catalyst for China to double down on energy self-sufficiency through renewables and storage technology, where its manufacturing dominance allows it to improve energy autonomy faster than its regional rivals. So while China absorbs the shock through reserves, it can watch as rising energy prices destabilize the US domestic economy. Beijing understands that elevated energy costs undermine US consumer confidence and complicate the administration's economic narrative. A prolonged conflict that keeps oil above $100 a barrel could force the US into a period of stagflation, eroding its industrial competitiveness and potentially triggering a global recession that hits Western consumer markets harder than Chinese manufacturing. So that's kind of the update in terms of China. I did want to cover a little bit of Ukraine because, like Russia, having a benefit with higher oil prices, a lot of support has now moved away from Ukraine. And with these higher oil and gas prices, how would that impact them? So that's the next topic that I did want to cover. The eruption of the US-Israel-Iran war. I'm not even sure what we're calling this war at this point, if it's the next Gulf War, Iranian war. I don't know what the term is. If anybody knows the name of this conflict, what they're calling it, then please put it in the comments. So this war started February 28th, but it's changed the strategic calculus for the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian war. So this has kind of diverted media attention away from Ukraine, as well as diplomatic capabilities away from Eastern Europe, and has repositioned Ukraine as a critical global security donor, even as it faces a severe equipment squeeze. I think at this point, it's safe to say that the Ukrainian military, the people that are in that conflict, are the most seasoned warriors on the planet right now because they've been fighting this war for 5 years. So, and they have had so many different lessons from fighting Russia. So, in a reversal of roles, if you will, Ukraine, once primarily an aid recipient, is now being actively solicited by the United States and the Gulf partners for military assistance. On March 5th, 2026, President Zelensky confirmed that he had agreed to a U.S. request. Oh, my live is going to end on me automatically. Sorry, I just got to drag the puzzle across. Keep going. Yes, I'm still here, TikTok. So, on March 5th, President Zelensky confirmed that he had agreed to a U.S. request to deploy Ukrainian drone warfare specialists to the Middle East. These teams possess unmatched live fire experience in downing Iranian-designed Shahed drones, which are now being used by the IRGC to pound U.S. bases and Gulf infrastructure. Typically, Iran was providing munitions to Russia, so Ukrainians have direct experience combating that or protecting themselves from that. Zelensky has proposed a pragmatic service swap with Gulf states. Ukraine provides its low-cost interceptor drones, which cost $2,100 each, and tactical expertise in exchange for the expensive US-made Patriot interceptors currently sitting in Gulf warehouses. By packaging its frontline experience as a tradable asset, Kyiv is attempting to secure high-end weaponry it cannot manufacture at home, such as the PAC-3 missiles needed to stop Russian ballistic strikes. The most immediate and grim impact for Ukraine is the severe drain on Western air defense stockpiles. In just 3 days of fighting in the Middle East, coalition forces used over 800 interceptor missiles, more than Ukraine has received in total during 5 years of war. Lockheed Martin, the sole producer of the advanced PAC-3 Patriot variant, produced only 600 units in all of 2025. The Middle East war is consuming these stocks faster than they can be replaced. The Pentagon has already notified Congress that it is diverting anti-drone technology intended for Ukraine to U.S. forces in the Middle East to counter the immediate threat to American personnel. So we have Russia, currently a primary beneficiary of the Middle Eastern turmoil, as rising energy prices provide basically an adrenaline boost to its war chest. Spiking energy prices have driven Russian Urals crude blend above $70 a barrel, well over the $59 benchmark assumed for the budget in 2026 by the Kremlin. These higher revenues narrow Russia's budget deficit and make it easier for President Putin to persist in a strategy of outlasting Western support for Kyiv. And we have Ukraine's counter strategy to offset Russia's windfall. Ukraine has intensified its own energy war, launching mass drone raids against Russian oil refineries and export terminals, such as the Mach 2 strike on the terminal and at, I'm going to butcher this name, Novorossiysk. If there's a Ukrainian on there, I apologize. I tried. Novorossiysk. Hopefully that's right. All right. So next I wanted to talk about the attrition strategy and the depth of munitions available in this conflict directly. We're still seeing Iran flying drones and missiles into the GCC. Obviously, the Americans and the Israelis are doing the same into Iran. The GCC nations have done a very good job up to this point of protecting the infrastructure and the civilian population from those missiles and drone attacks using these intercepts. But how long can that last? At some point, they might run out of these intercepts. And if we don't know really what the stockpile is in Iran, they've been preparing for 20 years. So there's a very high probability that they've got deep weapons warehouses. And if they can outlast the GCC nations' stockpiles of intercepts, then it could get a lot more dangerous in this region. So March 8th, that's today, the conflict has evolved into what the military planners term a salvo competition. a high-stakes contest where victory is determined not by a tactical brilliance, but by the cold mathematics of inventory exhaustion. While the GCC nations have demonstrated a high interception rate exceeding 90% for drones and missiles, the sustainability of this shield is now in critical doubt. We have an arsenal imbalance because of Iran's missile cities. Why all this happened, it's a mystery, honestly. I couldn't tell you. Every day there's a new excuse coming out of the Trump administration as to what happens, why this happened. Leading up to this for 50 years, it was the American policy, just isolationism, just to keep Iran contained economically more than anything. And then now it turns into a hot war. So Iran's endurance is rooted in 2 decades of fortress preparation, utilizing a decentralized mosaic defense strategy designed specifically to survive a decapitation strike. In Iran, it operates dozens of missile cities, hardened bases excavated into mountain ranges at depths of up to 500 meters. These facilities house an estimated 2,500 to 6,000 ballistic missiles. While coalition strikes have hit hundreds of above-ground launchers, analysts warn that the assets hidden in these underground complexes likely largely survived. Sorry, I've got in a bit. If you are interested in the continuation of this live, make sure you like and subscribe. And I think the next time I go live, you'll get the update. I still have a lot to cover. I'd like to go through the munitions that are available between all parties. I have a lot to cover. So unfortunately, I got to jump on a meeting. So make sure you like and subscribe. And go check out some of my other videos. If you have any questions when I come back onto the next live, I'll be sure to answer them on that live. I'll make notes and I'll answer them in the live. So I really appreciate it. It's 9:35 a.m. time currently, and it's the 8th of March. So I'll jump on maybe 11 o'clock. So in an hour and a half. All right, so watch for that. Stay safe. Take care, everybody. Appreciate your time. Thank you for joining me. It's been fun, and I will check for updates before I jump on the next live. All right? Thanks, everybody.